How would you like for your child to be not just good, but great? Not just average, but exceptional? Your child's full potential is not going to come at the hand of food companies lying about plant-based approaches and selling you false marketing. Instead, let me show you 5 life-changing reasons that your child will excel on an animal-based diet. It wasn't that long ago that I became a first-time father. You parents know what I'm referring to when I mention the immediate connection that you have with your child and wanting what's best for them. You want them to have every possible advantage from the start. Animal-based diets create advantages that are unparalleled. And I want to educate you on 5 of these so that you can feel confident with the recommendations and the diet that you're sharing with your child. But before I do, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Arlen Hill. I'm a health-focused regenerative rancher that teaches parents how to improve their kids' health in days, not months, by integrating an animal-based diet. The desire of every mother and father is to watch their child thrive and to be resilient and not succumb to the challenges of the environment that they're often faced with. They want a healthy kid, not a kid that's sick. But yet, when you look around, many children are sick. Many children, even by the numbers, deal with 6 to 8 different colds each season. Guys, that's an exceptionally high number. We can do better than that. Kids can thrive by focusing on an animal-based diet and not have these same susceptibilities. So how can I be so bold and emphatic about that comment? Well, let me share with you these 5 reasons that an animal-based diet is the direction to go. And I'm going to start us off with number 1, which is choline. Choline is a compound that is found very adequately in animal-based foods. In fact, the richest sources in the diet are going to be in animal-based foods. Eggs, your meats, and that can be whether we're talking about, say, for example, like beef or lamb, venison, bison. Any of these are going to be adequate quantities of choline, but you also find it in poultry. So your chicken, your turkey, duck, it's going to be there, as well as dairy, are all going to be great sources of choline in the diet. Now, if you haven't heard of choline, let me give you a bit of a context here and tell you why, as a parent, you would want to give so much consideration to making sure that this nutrient is available for your children as well as for yourself. And that is that one of the ways that we think about choline is that choline is a life-sustaining nutrient. And the reason that it's life-sustaining is that it's literally part of every single cell in your body. You don't make good cells, cellular structures, the very basic tissue of the body. Those are not going to be good, healthy structures without choline. And just to give you an idea of how that translates into what we see and what we experience as we observe children growing up, when we look at development is very much guided by choline. Now, granted, there's multiple things that come into play here, but choline has a large hand in the overall developmental process. And what should be really eye-opening here is that this is a very vulnerable deficiency. It's so, for example, with pregnant moms, lactating moms, especially if we're looking at not being the first or second, but third and beyond pregnancies, or if the diet is inadequate or devoid of choline or these animal-based sources that I mentioned earlier, the probability of a choline deficiency drastically increases. And so what that means is that this structural element is inadequate to build the cells in the body. And how that actually begins to play out is choline becomes critical in neurological development. So let's just focus on the brain for a moment here. And when we think about the overall structural development of the brain, choline guides that structural development of the brain. But that's not the only way that the brain develops as well. We also have to look at the programming nature of the brain and how the tissues of the brain interact with the environment. And just to show you how nuanced this can get, and not to get us into the weeds, but I do want to just give you an idea of how nuanced this can be, is that choline literally influences our genes that are linked to memory and learning. And so think about that for a moment. If there is an inadequate amount of choline in the early years of life, what's going to happen is that structurally the brain's not going to develop as it should. And then the programming of the brain that's going to allow for optimal learning and memory as that child grows into adolescence and adulthood is going to be inferior. So the absence of choline at youth could set them back literally for the rest of their life. So we want to make sure that we have adequate amounts of choline to be able to nourish the brain tissue. Even if you think about the different chemicals that are produced in the brain, one of the core chemicals, acetylcholine, one that we very much think about related to brain speed. How fast can you remember things? How fast can you calculate things? Brain speed, that's acetylcholine, and very much you can hear in the name of that compound that choline is important. So this is one, and there was a reason I put this one at the top of the list because it's definitely important. But this is not the only thing that is going to be supplied by an animal-based diet that can literally be life-changing for a child. The second thing are going to be immune-stimulating nutrients. And this was why I set our stage by talking about how frequently kids get sick. And we have to think about what the bigger implications on that are as well, because it's not just affecting the child, but that's obviously important, but it's also affecting the parent and the quality of their life as well. So knowing that kids get sick, I'll share a brief example with you on this. At the time that I'm shooting this, my son is he's just slightly less than 2 years old. And in his lifetime, he's been sick once. And he's not been given any medications. He hasn't been given any vaccines. We haven't given him anything external. But what this kid has had since day one is mom's milk, which transitioned into A2 raw dairy and an animal-based diet as he began to introduce solid foods into his diet. Now, he doesn't only eat animal foods, it's animal-based, so we have some plant foods in there as well, but we emphasize the animal component with him. And this kid's a thriving kid. So I'm not saying that to brag, I'm saying that as an example and really putting what I'm telling you to the test and not just telling you something off the top of my head or that I went into a book somewhere and read or on a research article. This is reality that I've tested within my own household. So part of the reason that I think his immune system has been so robust is because within these animal-based foods, here are some of the things that he's been getting. And there's many other things that we could point to, but these are just some that come to mind for me. One is a compound called lactoferrin in the diet, and that's from dairy. So lactoferrin has even been talked about as a miracle molecule, but it is an immune stimulating molecule. It helps manage his infections, the presence of different microbes. It stimulates the microbiota in the gut. It's very essential to the mom and to the child. So this is something he's had routine exposure to either from my wife or from the A2 raw dairy. But that's not it. Remember, I said as he started implementing in the whole foods, we introduced our foods that we raise here at Harvest Hills Ranch. And so with that, that means that he's getting grass-fed and finished beef. He's getting pasture-raised poultry. And one of the things that we know about those animals is that they have higher concentrations of antioxidants compared to their conventional counterparts. And antioxidants are necessary to bolster the immune system. But even when you look at even if you were factoring in conventional options here, you're still within this animal-based category going to find higher amounts of vitamin A, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, and those are all building up the immune system, but they're not something that needs to be taken at the moment that the child becomes sick. They're already present because they're flowing in from an animal-based diet, and the immune system stays robust all the time. And think about what that means, moms and dads. That means that there's going to be fewer sick days. Your child is going to be more productive in their school environment or homeschool environment, whatever they're in, or if they're really young, just being able to adapt to their environment and experience life more fully if they're not dealing with a sickness. And for you as the parent, that means that you're going to have more restful nights because you're not up taking care of a sick kid. Now, here's what may seem, let me transition into the third life-changing element in an animal-based diet, which may be the most obvious of all, but it's going to be protein. And we don't want the frail, sickly kid, right? But on the other hand, you see that frail child, but on the other hand, you see too often the overweight child who very much now has become a statistic. So we don't want our child to be a statistic. We won't want them to be average. We want them to be exceptional. Adequate protein is going to be part of the answer to how they get there. It's going to be the ultimate metabolic regulator. So it's going to help them grow at the ideal rate that they're supposed to have adequate structural development. But it's also, because of its metabolically regulating activity, it's also going to inhibit the increased deposition of fat in the body and preventing them from becoming overweight. And it's, again, you're maximizing their overall growth potential. They're going to have fewer injuries. They're going to have more stable hormonal development and transition. So as they move from adolescence into the teenage years, or from kind of crossing into that teenage time frame, those hormonal shifts are going to be less dramatic with adequate amounts of protein, because now you've got the building blocks for other protein or for other hormones, but you've also got the constituents necessary to help metabolize those hormones as they should be. Plus, you've got a good, healthy gut function with adequate protein intake that's going to make sure that those metabolites of those hormones don't build up and that they're getting excreted at the rate that they should be. And one other one that you'll probably appreciate here, adequate protein is going to allow them to make their neurochemicals in the brain, in the gut, and that means that their moods are going to be more stable. So just looking at more balanced overall environment in the home. So that's number 3 in terms of these life-changing components of an animal-based diet. What's number 4? Well, number 4 is right in this same line of thought, which is going to be nutrients that regulate genes. Now, we want adequate genetic expression. We want the genes to interact with the environment as it should. What's often talked about is epigenetics. We want those genes to not be overly active when they shouldn't be, or underactive when they should be active. And the way that we can help guide that, nature gives us this ability very easily, and that's with key nutrients. And some of those key nutrients that are very rich in an animal-based diet are going to be things like B12, B2, zinc, choline, which we talked about earlier, vitamin A, vitamin D, which I also mentioned. These are all very important for DNA replication. This falls under the umbrella of a conversation or a concept known as methylation. I don't want to derail us on that, but understand that it's logical that when we're young and we're growing, our DNA replication is at a faster rate than it is when we're an adult. For that DNA replication to support the growth process, for it to occur at the rate that it needs to, means that you have to have an abundant quantity of these nutrients on a routine basis. If those nutrients aren't available, then ultimately what's going to happen is that somewhere that DNA replication process is going to be set back, and ultimately that means that is going to potentially impact your child in some way. Not a scenario that we want to see play out. So an animal-based diet delivers these nutrients that keep the DNA replication flowing at a very fast and efficient rate. Now, let me just ask you real quickly here. Are you finding this information helpful? I hope that you are, truly. I hope that you're starting to see how beneficial an animal-based diet can be for your child. And if you are, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so others out there can start to hear this same information and they can do the same for their child as well. Now, the 5th component to an animal-based diet that is can be potentially life-changing, literally, is microbiota boosting elements that you find in an animal-based diet. Now, that is not to say that other diets don't help the microbiota in their gut. Clearly they do. Components in plants can definitely help the microbiota. But too often, we overlook the ones that exist in an animal-based diet, and many times an animal-based diet is suggested to inhibit the activity of the microbiota. Here's where that falls apart. One, I'll give you a couple of examples here. One are short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are, as the name implies, very short fats. And we can find those in butter, and they're very rich in, butter's a great source of them, but they're rich in other components of the animal-based diet as well. And so you'll also find that, since we're talking about dairy may be the most bioactive compound-rich food that there is. It is extremely dense in molecules that stimulate the microbiota. I gave you the lactoferrin earlier. We talked about that. It can lead to these short-chain fatty acids like you find in butter. So that's another one. You can also have what are known as these other bioactive peptides like glycomicropeptide. Don't worry about all that. I'll pop a card up here on the screen. So if you want to dive more into that, you can dive more into that. But just know that the constituents that are present in dairy are going to be extremely beneficial to the bacteria in the gut. And we all hear more and more about how important the gut function is. This is one of the ways that you can support the gut function with an animal-based diet. I'll give you two other components to this. One is eggs. Eggs have constituents in them that can stimulate the microbiota as well. And then even when you just generically consume proteins can break down into what's called a branch chain fatty acid. So it's similar to a short chain fatty acid, but not exactly the same, but they enhance the activity of the microbiota. These things are amazing in what they can do. They have so many far-reaching benefits throughout the body. But understand, and this is, if you look at within the youth population in the United States and really beyond the United States, we see issues like learning disabilities. We see allergies being a big issue. I mentioned how frequently kids get sick now. These are all things that are not allowing kids to progress towards their optimal state of health, but they're all linked to an unbalanced microbiota as well. Now, I've got a bonus here for you. There's so many things about an animal-based diet that can be potentially life-changing for your kid, but let me give you this bonus, and this one's just a big high level that I think will just really settle in with you well. And it is that when your child is consuming an animal-based diet, they have less desire to go for ultra-processed foods or refined foods because your kids are satiated. They've learned what a good diet feels like and how much better they feel on a good diet. And they overall are going to have more balanced brain chemistry, more balanced body chemistry. And that is ultimately what we're looking for in our kids as they develop. Now, I realize that you may still be on the fence about going all in on an animal-based diet, but to help you make the change that is best for your family moving forward, let me show you what happened in the first 6 months in my home by incorporating in an animal-based diet. Shocking outcome.